So, continuing this series on compassion, moving into exploring compassion for others, title Letting the Heart Resonate. So, again, there'll be a little talk and then a led meditation, and the led meditation is geared towards people who have an established practice. So, in the teachings, compassion is seen as the way that loving kindness responds to suffering. And the tradition describes a number of ways that this response of compassion can get blocked. So the heart naturally wants to open. That's its natural tendency. But it can get blocked, and then instead we fall into indifference or pity or horrified anxiety. And what all of these responses have in common is that they're actually an avoidance of the suffering. They actually involve a moving away, some kind of turning away from suffering, resistance to letting it be seen, known, and felt. So, in the first session, I was talking about how when we resist our own painful experience, we block our self-compassion. And in the same way, for the heart to respond to the suffering of others, it has to really touch that suffering. So if we're responding with indifference, we're staying distant from the suffering. And if we're responding with pity, there's also a distancing involved. We're keeping the person distant by sort of slightly looking down on them, rather than the sense of really being alongside someone, with them in what they're going through, sense of solidarity. With the response of horrified anxiety, our own feelings of anxiety have taken over and sort of displaced the other person's experience. And sometimes when we fall into horrified anxiety, we can get into a kind of frenetic helping activity, which then again can move us away from actually taking in the suffering. We keep ourselves busy rather than actually being with the suffering. So for compassion to arise, there has to be a real opening to the reality of the suffering. It needs to be seen, sensed, recognised. But, and this is the tricky bit, without it taking us into suffering ourselves, without us getting entangled and then suffering ourselves, because then we've just increased the sort of net amount of suffering in the world, which is not what compassion practice is about. So the word compassion in English literally means to suffer with, but the Buddhist tradition doesn't see it that way. It's possible to empathise or resonate with the suffering of others without ourselves suffering. So one of the words for compassion in Buddhism is anukampa, which literally apparently means something like to quiver or to tremble. So the heart's quivering, trembling with compassion. So this is quite a fine edge, not necessarily easy to find. It might take practice. And inevitably, in practicing, we'll be falling into these places of indifference, of pity, horrified anxiety. Falling into them, seeing that we've done that, coming back. And some of the suffering that we're facing is so vast, isn't it? The COVID virus, the environmental crisis. It's really easy to get overwhelmed, and then we either shut off or we get totally lost in our emotional response. So rather than expecting ourselves to be in touch with compassion all the time, perhaps we can think of compassion as being like a star that we keep navigating by. So we're noticing when we're off course, and then we come back over and over to our point of navigation. And it's in sensing when we're off course that the heart is learning, that's not quite it. I'm a bit caught there. I'm a bit shut off. I'm a bit closed off. I'm going into a bit of indifference. So it's like an ongoing process. Heart opens, closes down a bit, it opens again. We're not doing it wrong when it's closing down. So what helps us to navigate in this way? What helps us to see and know and feel when we're off course? Well, of course, the body is a great support and a great sort of barometer to help us sense when we're off course. We can notice the quality and the texture of our breathing. Is it free or constricted? We can look for openness in the body, especially perhaps where we feel our heart to be, which might be in the chest, but not for everybody. We can notice the alignment of the body, whether our body's aligned, whether there's a strain coming from leaning one way or the other. When we're resisting our experience, the body has this very strong tendency to lean away. You can notice this, rather than a sense of like we're sitting, we're standing, kind of at the center, not pulled or pushed. So we can come back to that alignment. So we'll take this into a led practice. And as with the self-compassion practice, we're going to be deliberately bringing in some suffering, bringing to mind others who are suffering,